First, thanks for inviting us. This is very exciting. My name is Ellie, and obviously from the Ada Lovelace Institute, here today with my colleagues Roshni and Helena. So we're going to talk through two pieces of work that we've just completed, which connect in various different ways to the question of how to involve publics in input into AI debates and policy. So first off is going to be Roshni talking through the survey, which she led on with the Alan Turing Institute, and then I'm going to move on to talk about our deliberative work. And Helena's going to be joining us for some reflections and Q&A at the end, so we'll try and leave as much time as we can for some good discussion. Before we deep dive into the survey, we just need to set a little bit of context for you about the Public Voices work. It's not owned by the Ada Lovelace Institute, of course. It's a much wider programme of work, which is undertaken as a satellite project funded by the Responsible AI UK and EPSRC. The project set out with a very broad and very important remit, which is a sort of multi-stakeholder, multi-partner project of how to best include public voices in AI research, design and policy. And what it ended up as is as I said, a multi-partner collaboration between the Digital Good Network at the University of Sheffield, Elgin Social Research Limited, the Ada Lovelace Institute, Alan Turing, University College London, and various academics there. And it included lots of other contributions from organisations, including Connected by Data, of course, who co-heard and managed the People's Panel, which was an oversight and advisory body of the members of the public who inputted at all sorts of different stages, as well as 4 community-led research initiatives who were given funding by the mega project to do their own work. And this was a fantastic range of work, which really deeply dove into the impacted and affected communities, including gig workers, migrants, and communities who are already facing racialised over-policing. So I'm not going to go through all this package of work, but I just wanted to reference it. And I think Roshni is going to put a link to the Digital Good Network site where you can have a look at all the outputs rather from the project. It's a really fantastic range of work, which was done in an incredibly short amount of time. I think the project ran for a year. So considering that, it's really come out with such a fantastic range of very impactful findings. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to pass over to Roshni, who's going to take us through our mega package, or our own mega package of work, which is the Public Attitude Survey, which she led on in partnership with the Alan Turing Institute. Thanks, Roshni.
Thank you. And I'll share links after I'm done presenting. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you about a second wave of a nationally representative survey of UK attitudes to AI. Just as a bit of context, the aim of the survey was to understand attitudes to specific applications of AI, kind of recognizing that talking about AI very broadly isn't so helpful. It's quite difficult to kind of probe on attitudes to AI at that kind of higher level. So kind of adding a bit of context adds a lot of value there. We were interested in people's kind of overall levels of awareness and experience with these technologies, the levels of benefit and concern they kind of perceive with these technologies, and also key advantages and disadvantages that come to mind when kind of asked about these different use cases. And then this was followed by some questions around kind of expectations around governance and regulation of these technologies, as well as specific attitudes to things like data sharing and experiences with online harms. We focused on 8 specific applications of AI. 6 of them were repeated from our 2023 survey. And these were broadly categorized as risk and eligibility technologies, facial recognition and robotics. So those were our repeated use cases. And this year we also asked about kind of large language models at a general level. So giving an example as ChatGPT and mental health chatbots as well. And quite crucially, this year we opted to incorporate some sample boosting in our survey, in our design. And this was so that we could analyze attitudes of groups of people that are likely to be disproportionately negatively impacted by a lot of the technologies that we were interested in, but otherwise kind of too small to look at in terms of sample size if we were to go for a purely nationally representative approach. And so we specifically oversampled based on ethnicity, income, and digital skills. And I'm going to talk you through some headline findings. There's obviously a lot more detail than I can kind of go into here in the main report. So if anything kind of feels unanswered, I'm more than happy to talk about it at the Q&A at the end of the session. But overall, we found that there were some use cases of AI that were quite positively perceived, particularly those in diagnostic health. So kind of assessing risk of cancer from a scan, and applications in justice as well. And similar to our previous wave of the survey, we noticed that applications in healthcare were less positively perceived than that more diagnostic approach. So, for instance, robotic care assistants kind of had middling levels of perceived benefit. And mental health care chatbots, which were a new use case to the survey, was the use where few people could see kind of an overall kind of benefit for it. And at the same time, we found that concerns around AI are still quite substantial, even when expectations of positive impact are high. So kind of highlighting that attitudes aren't necessarily linear in that sense, and people can hold both, can see potential benefits as well as recognize potential concerns as well. And things like applications in robotics were perceived as quite concerning in particular, as well as our public sector use of AI that we had in the survey. So assessing eligibility for welfare benefits such as universal credit, again, a use case that was identified as quite concerning overall. And interestingly, since our 2022/2023 wave of the survey, we noticed that while overall kind of perceptions of benefit for the use cases that we repeated remained quite stable, concern levels increased significantly across the board. So people reporting a lot more concern, despite seeing similar levels of benefit than they did 2 years ago. And quite critically, we found that attitudes to AI are very distinct. So a few examples here, we found that Black and Asian participants were significantly more concerned by facial recognition for policing than the national average. So kind of over 50% of people from both of those groups reported concern compared to 39% of the general public. And we also found that those on lower incomes were consistently more concerned about all of the applications of AI that we asked about. And this kind of held true when we controlled for other demographic factors that are kind of associated with attitudes as well. So even when kind of controlling for age or education level, digital literacy, and ethnicity, it seemed that income remained kind of a significant driver in these attitudes. And when it came to kind of the key advantages and disadvantages people associated with each use case, we saw a lot of consistency with our last wave of the survey. So accuracy and efficiency remained kind of top benefits that people report for a lot of the applications of AI we asked for. But kind of concerns persist. So worries about over-reliance on technology, accountability for mistakes, and transparency in decision making came across in several applications. And I've kind of highlighted on the slide the use of assessing risk of cancer from a scan, because this was one of our most popular kind of applications. You can see there still, over 60% of people report concerns around over-reliance. Things like accountability and transparency kind of remain quite prevalent. But interestingly, what we did see in terms of difference from our previous wave of the survey was that concern around kind of data security and data sharing was a lot higher than it was in 2023. And when it came to personal experience, so we asked about experience of using large language models as well as mental health care chatbots. And overall, we found that there is some adoption of large language models for everyday tasks. And the proportions that we found were slightly higher than other surveys in the field at the moment, suggesting potential increased adoption. But this kind of regular use is still very minimal. Less than 10% of people report using large language models for all of the different tasks that we asked about. And there are also potentially kind of red lines in where tools like this might be deemed appropriate, with 39% of people not being open to the idea of using large language models for supporting job applications, for instance. And then we found that the public self-reports high exposure to AI-generated harms and expects the government to be equipped in relation to AI safety. So there's a strong preference for the government and regulators instead of only private companies having having a suite of powers around the kind of oversight and regulation of AI. And to conclude, we found that laws and regulation kind of remains a key mechanism for increasing comfort with AI. And 72% of people are kind of reporting this, which is an increase from 2022/2023. And then I'll just share some reflections on conducting a survey in this way. We found that there's kind of a tension between kind of having something that's nationally representative and also kind of designing for inclusivity in mind. Things like sample boosting are really helpful for analysis, but they kind of throw other things off in terms of survey design. They kind of complicate other things in relation to survey design, and they have implications around comparability with other nationally representative work, as well as kind of implications on the data. There's a lot of limitations in the industry in terms of what's actually feasible in terms of oversampling. There seemed to be quite a lot of deficit in terms of like the diversity of participants available on large scale panels. And just to acknowledge that sample boosting does not necessarily equate to kind of inclusive survey design as well. So just recognizing that limitation. And yeah, I'll stop there and hand over to Ellie. I think Ellie's going to do kind of a quick
I'm going to try and share my screen. Hold on. Hopefully this will work. Okay, so actually, let's just come out of that. I'm just going to run through a work we undertook in parallel as part of this Public Voices work. So we obviously had a large scale quant approach, and we designed a smaller scale, didn't feel small at the time, qualitative study, which focused on amplifying people's voices in relation to public good. And so obviously the concept has been used a lot recently. The concept of public good has been used a lot to justify investment into AI use and tech innovation. But often policymakers don't really specify what they mean by public good or what actually good looks like. So what we wanted to do is really start from that basis and really focus on this project on that issue. And as you see here, there's a range of people that I want to make sure are accredited in this, and you'll find out why. So including the Ada researchers and the community researchers involved, but also we in AI, who contributed a lot of their expertise to this work too. So we wanted to start from the basis of what publics wanted with public good and what they wanted and needed from AI. And to make the research as public as much as we could. So we wanted to get underneath public's views really and understand the 360 as much as we can within the time frame and what people were finding out about AI in their lives and what it meant to them. And we could have chosen various different routes to do this. We have called this a model of deliberative inquiry, which is a blend of deliberative methods and community-led research methods, which is sort of somewhat represented here in the diagram. We had 3 place-based case studies. So Brixton, Belfast and Southampton, which you'll see on those arrows on the left, and they were working in parallel with us during this project. It's recognisably deliberative in the way that there's a structured process. It involved a learning phase, which is where we in AI inputted into the information design. And it cohered a set of expectations, let's say, at the end. So there's kind of it was recognisably deliberative in some sense. But we really wanted to ground it in people's lives, and we did that in 2 ways. So one of them was community researchers. So we recruited and we worked very closely with 3 pairs of community researchers, pair for each site. And they were really key here for setting up the conversation in the community, for grounding it and doing the translation work. So we could really start with what people, how people position public good in their lives and see AI through that lens. So we started with the good first, we then moved to AI, and then we joined them up at the end. And And there were around 15 to 17 people recruited in each site. And again, working in parallel. And a lot of the people that we recruited were, I would say, people who were not normally part of research activities. They had various and intersecting forms of exclusion that we kind of dug into during the project. And yes, we started by the exploring. We then moved to AI and we looked at that equation. So we tried to make it as public-led as we could. Our report is published. You can look at it on the resources page. But I want to share a few key takeaways today, just so you know, kind of top lines that we found. So one of them was about the concept of what public good meant to them. Obviously, we had many diverse and very individuated responses to that question, but there were some very core and common principles that people shared. So one of them was the belief that public good was about values in public life and about enabling everybody to thrive, that people cared deeply about relationships, about community, about having a community, feeling safe, secure, and well, and a lot of interest in protecting the environment and access to nature, which came up again and again. So when policymakers talk about public good and refer to public good, we've got to think about what publics hear from that. And ours is one study, but it really chimes with lots of other studies that have looked into the question of what a good society is, what public good means. And I feel like there is some coherence here in what public good is as a meaningful values-based concept for people. So in regard to AI, what do these diverse publics feel about AI? What really struck us is their readings of the ecosystem that they're living in are really perceptive. So people understand that some AI tools in a particular context will behave a certain way and may harm or benefit certain people. But they also understand AI use creates systemic and societal level changes. And additionally, they see the context of novel AI development, which is rapidly changing the ecosystem as well as the ground for their conversation. So their views are often predicated on a sense of uncertainty and expectation of change and ambiguity, which came up again and again. And for this reason, we think about their views being quite composite and layered. So they hold many different views at once. And this is why it's really important to have these qualitative studies in relation and complement to quant, because under our survey statistics are layers of feelings, assumptions, and perceptions. And these contexts have really caused us to really quite shift or adjust our narratives about what public thinks in particular ways, which you'll read about in the report. But certainly, people are expecting big changes. They don't know quite what these are or what it means for them, but they see AI's potential in some ways to work for public good, but they're very uncertain about it. So AI for public good, how do people make sense of this? When we asked them to connect these two ideas, they didn't move their original perceptions of what public good should mean. So they kept this integrity of the concept as a value-based concept, and they expected AI to align around it. And I think that's really, really important. So they centralized fairness, equity, care, and protecting the vulnerable, for instance. And there was a real enthusiasm where they thought AI could help solve human level challenges and improve lives for everyone. So in places like health diagnostics or climate action, but it came with clear boundaries. So people are really concerned about how AI might erode their abilities to live meaningful and purposeful lives. Anything that deepened bias or discrimination or inequality, any use that undermined care or human connection or relationality or damaged the environment, there was absolute red lines. And they're very attuned to the impact of AI on environments, and their local environments as well. So I'm going to leave you with a set of expectations that we worked up, which participants developed with us, and we read back to them in the findings workshop about how to make AI for public good. You can read more about their rationales for this in the report, but I think I want to finish by saying, so why public input really matters for deploying AI well. People really understood the complexities of AI, so they really understand that it can be used in discrete ways, but they're very skeptical about how it can serve them. And that skepticism is not abstract, it's based on experience of public services that are underfunded or digital tools that are used that don't behave well for them. It's experience of systems that they rely on, but they don't treat them very well, or that they feel are uncaring enough already or untrustworthy. And a sense of the sensitivity to the hype of market-driven tech and the kind of consumerism, which they really felt was degrading trust and social connection in their communities. So there's curiosity, there's interest, there's even excitement. But I think they were asking questions that were very important. And listening to public voice obviously matters because if AI is going to work for public good, then we need to understand and engage publics in defining what public good means. So we're going to open for questions in 1 second, but we've been left with lots of reflections from this project. And one of them is about the challenges of the funding ecosystem for engaging people meaningfully in AI. This project ran over a very limited number of months, but it was funded by a mega project that also had a very, very short timescale. And we came up against the challenges of doing meaningful community work under those conditions. But we really, really did feel that the importance of the community-led translation of the community researchers was absolutely key to the findings that came out of this project. And the place basis of how place changes the way in which people engage with AI, I think is really, really important in an area that hasn't been looked at yet as comprehensively as it might be. And we feel that a lot of the work was very challenging in terms of how do you actually give publics the tools to be able to to make meaningful decisions about AI. Again, a very common challenge, but we definitely came up against it. Right, I'm going to then open the floor for questions, I think, and engage Helena as well. We have questions that we'd love to ask you in terms of your response to this research and what do you find useful from it, and but also where do you think this should take us and where should we go next? I think is our big question that we'd love to hear more about. But any reflections would be fantastic.